Today we're doing phyllo cake from Crete, which is one of the best recipes you've never heard of. This recipe was introduced to us by one of my all-time favorite cooks and cookbook authors. She wrote a book called Aegean. Her name is Marianna Leivaditaki. And we actually went to Crete for a week with her, and she demonstrated how to make this cake. This recipe is based on a classic Cretan dish, portokalopita, which does use sometimes flour and phyllo dough and a sugar syrup. The problem is it tends to get a little heavy and sodden. So this version, which was created by a friend of Marianna's, it turns out she cut the phyllo dough and toasted it in the oven first, which gave it a much lighter texture. So let's get started on one of the best recipes in the world you've never heard of. So one of the great things about this recipe is we're dealing with phyllo dough, but it's easy because we're just going to cut it into pieces. We don't have to do anything really fancy with it. So you start with 8 ounces. You can throw this in the fridge overnight from the freezer, or you can leave it on the counter for an hour and a half. Most recipes, when they start with phyllo dough, I go, please, I'm not going to do this because you have to take every sheet and brush it with butter. It's kind of a pain. This is the world's easiest recipe using phyllo dough because you're just going to take it all out in one bit, and we're just going to roll it up. This is like cutting pasta, and all we have to do now is to trim it into half-inch pieces, and you're done, essentially. So that's it. That's really easy. And then we'll just, unravel. So, even my 5-year-old can do this. Pick them up, throw them around. I'm sort of abusing my phyllo dough. I'm just playing with it. It's great. So that's it. So this is, none of this sheet by sheet, butter and everything else. This is really easy to do. This goes into a 350 oven for 15 to 18 minutes. Halfway through, flip it over. Now we're going to make the syrup. And this is true of a lot of cakes. The French do this a lot. It's a soaking syrup, so after you bake the cake, you punch holes in the top and then you put the syrup in. It gives you additional flavor, and it also keeps it really moist. So we'll cut off just a few strips of orange. Okay. Sugar, orange zest, bay leaves, cinnamon stick, 2 cardamom pods, a little bit of water, and then we'll take that same orange, and we need about a half a cup of juice, and we'll just estimate.
Hey Chris, how many cups of juice are in an orange?
That is a deep philosophical question. How many cups of juice there are in orange? It depends on the orange. Like a grapefruit orange, sometimes you get almost no juice. It seems to be really dry inside. Other times you get a grapefruit orange that has a ton of juice. One thing I would look for if you want a juicy orange or grapefruit is to feel the weight. If it feels heavy, it's going to have more juice. If you pick up an orange or a grapefruit that's kind of light, it's probably not going to be that juicy. So there is no rule. I would say good orange should have 3/4 a cup of juice, something like that. To make a sugar syrup, all we have to do is melt the sugar. Once that's done, we're going to strain it out and reserve it for after the cake comes out of the oven. This is one of my pet peeves, bay leaves. I've claimed for 40 years that nobody can actually tell the difference between adding a couple of bay leaves, like to a stew or a soup. I think in a sugar syrup, however, with 2 or 3 bay leaves, you will be able to taste it because you don't have 3 pounds of meat in it. So in this kind of application, I like a bay leaf or 2. In a big super stew, I just don't think you can tell the difference. So we're going to let this cool with the orange zest, bay leaf, etc. in it, obviously to diffuse the flavor. Once it's cool, we'll strain it out and use that later on, the last step for making the cake. Now it's time to make the batter for the cake. Listen to this. Doesn't that sound good? We'll fold the phyllo into the batter. So we'll start with sugar. This is a good tip, which is if you're going to zest lemons, limes, orange, etc., you want to do that right over the batter or wherever you're going to use it. Don't do it on the cutting board because a lot of the flavor is in the essential oils in the orange, for example, and that's going to go on the board. You're not going to be able to get that off the board. So we're going to do this right into the sugar. The second trick is that zesting lime or orange or whatever onto sugar and then putting that in a mixer for 30 seconds, you're going to essentially create an orange sugar. It's going to really give the sugar a lot of lovely flavor. And you don't have to measure this. This is a tablespoon or so. It's not going to matter if it's a tablespoon and a half or whatever.
How many tablespoons of orange zest are in an orange?
how many angels dance on the head of a pin? I mean, what? Is this like, we should get the Torah out now and start having philosophical discussions? Depends on the size of the orange. I'd say you'd have up to 2 tablespoons. Now we'll take a stand mixer and we're going to use the paddle attachment. And we'll just put that on low. And you can see what's going to happen is the sugar actually starts to turn a slightly yellowish color or orange color. This smells like the garden of Eden. The rest of the ingredients, Greek yogurt. I mean, it has to be Greek yogurt. Vegetable oil, eggs, tablespoon of baking powder, which is quite a lot, and a little salt. Always add salt to desserts. We'll start on low. Okay, so that's the batter.
And what kind of consistency are we looking for in the batter when you introduce the batter?
Well, this is only one part of the batter. The other part is the phyllo, which we've essentially toasted and dried in the oven. So this is very liquid. It's even more liquid than a pancake batter. So we're going to take the phyllo, which is super dry. We're going to start with about half of it. This doesn't look like the strangest recipe in the world. It is probably the most interesting cake recipe I've ever seen. And it's also one of the easiest. It's not hard to do. So when you fold this, it's like folding anything else. You don't want to crush everything and press it down. So you want to use a light hand, as it were. So this is one time when a classic French folding method is helpful.
What do you mean the one time?
Well, a lot of times when you're folding ingredients together, it doesn't matter that much. Depends what you're folding. Here you have toasted phyllo, which is very light. If you fold it too hard, you're going to press it down and you're going to get a more dense texture when it bakes. The final texture is going to be surprisingly light. And part of the reason is you haven't overfolded. The good news is you have a lot of eggs in here. You have a fair amount of baking powder, a tablespoon. So that's going to help give it some lift. So we already have the oven at 350 when we toasted the phyllo. We're going to put this back into the same oven, 45, 50 minutes, something like that. So the syrup is cooled, straight ahead. And you've all probably done this lots of times. Take a dowel or a toothpick.
Why are we doing this?
Because we're going to pour the syrup in a little bit at a time. Instead of having it just run off entirely down the side, you want to get as much of it as you can into the cake. Then we'll do this slowly, and we're going to come back and do it every few minutes. If you poured it all in at once, a lot of it's just going to go off down the side. It's going to take time for that syrup to get absorbed into the cake, especially through those holes. So you wait 2 or 3 minutes, let the syrup get absorbed, come back, add more syrup. Do that a few times until all the syrup has been soaked into the cake. And then you want to let this sit about 2 hours before you slice it. The interesting thing is you don't really know what's going on inside with this cake. It looks great on the outside, but you can't figure out what kind of cake this is until you cut into it. And even then, you're not really sure. So it's really the surprise ingredient, the phyllo. It's just an amazing thing to make a cake out of. So this is a classic enhanced whipped cream. We use some yogurt with this. You could use creme fraiche. You could use mascarpone. It gives it a little bit of tang and flavor. Obviously, yogurt makes sense for this cake because it's a recipe from Crete. So the first thing you notice is the texture is super light. A lot of French cakes like this that are soaked tend to be heavy. Yeah, that's pretty good. It is so delicious. It's got 2 things going on. It has that moistness from the sugar syrup, the orange flavor, and then it has almost a sponge cake texture underneath. If you made this at home, you would be a local hero. There is nothing like this in the world. This is the most unique cake recipe ever, and it's super good. And it's not hard.